Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our interview with Dimitri Sirota. Dimitri is a co-founder and CEO at BigID, which is a data intelligence platform that enables organizations to know the enterprise data and take action for privacy, protection, and perspective. Dimitri is also a three-time entrepreneur, Ernst & Young 2021 Entrepreneur of the Year, and finalist for New York Forbes Tech Council Contributor. Dimitri, thank you for coming to our interview today.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me, Boris. Nice to meet you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's start. We had our community knows a little bit about BigID. Someone who listened to our podcast 2 years ago, we had an interview with Roger Hell, who was CISO, I think, CISO from your company. And we had a chance to understand initially what you guys do. And for those who didn't listen to this interview, maybe could you perhaps tell us a short story about what brought you to where you are right now and what you guys at BigID are up to these days?
Sure. So, kind of immigrant from the old Soviet Union, I think like you and I are discussing up front, and then ended up in Canada, studied physics for both undergrad and graduate work, and then started my first two companies up in Canada. After I sold my last company, I moved to New York. After working for the company that bought us for a couple of years, I started BigID with a co-founder in Tel Aviv. So today the company is a little bit closer to 450 people, raised about 250 million, and we have about half our staff in Tel Aviv, and the rest kind of distributed through Europe, US, and elsewhere. So we've been selling products for kind of about 4 years, and when we kind of got started, we thought about how new regulations like GDPR were going to impact the problem of data protection. So how does privacy affect protection? And then how do you automate some of the reporting that you want to do for privacy, whether it's privacy impact assessments, record processing activity. But while we started there kind of 4 years ago with some large kind of household brands, we've kind of evolved into a more full-fledged data protection and privacy platform for the cloud and hybrid cloud.
Mm-hmm. So why did you choose to focus on the data privacy? Because you had some successful companies in IT space and probably different verticals or different niches. So what was the reason?
Yeah, so I've always had, all my companies have been in security, some element around security, either kind of network security or API security. And we thought that kind of data security created an opportunity brought on by GDPR. So the challenge with data security is a lot of the technology for, whatever you want to do to data, whether it's, block it from kind of crossing organizational boundaries through DLP or encrypted through type of encryption tools or tokenization tools. Whatever you want to do for it, it all kind of starts with kind of knowing your data, understanding what data, where's my critical data, where's my sensitive data. And what we realized is the technology to kind of know your data hadn't really evolved since the early internet, when people were trying to solve for PCI. And PCI, for those in your audience unfamiliar with it, is really about payment card information, looking for credit cards. Just as e-commerce started happening around kind of 2002 or sooner, people were worried about, credit cards kind of floating around and representing risk. So our whole kind of evolution was kind of saying, look, the technology that people invented for figuring out their data, credit card data, social security data, hasn't really budged in 2 decades. And along comes GDPR, and GDPR is all about privacy, and privacy is all about people. And that means that you need to be able to locate not just a credit card, but all the data that belongs to Dimitri or Boris. And that's a much harder problem, because since kind of PCI came around 2003, the places where people keep data has exploded, right? It used to be all your data was in a mainframe. It was in an Exchange server, a SQL server from Oracle. It was in a few limited places. Today, data could be in umpteen number of places in the cloud. It could be in 1,000 different SaaS applications all over AWS, Azure, GCP. It could still be in mainframe and SQL and Hadoop, but the world of data has kind of evolved. And on top of it, so not only is there a complexity around coverage, being able to locate this data in so many different places, there's also a complexity around what represents personal information. If you look at the kind of the older breach regulations, they all focused on PII, highly identifiable, uniquely identifiable data like credit card, like social security, like address. Well, the world has evolved and the privacy regulations require you to know all your data, right? So that could be passwords, it could be API keys, it could be clickstream, you know, when you do on a website. It could be GPS coordinates, it could be zip codes. So all of that is still personal, right? Documents that belong to you, emails that belong to you. And so there needed to be a new approach to finding all this data, finding in all these different places and providing context around, hey, this person lives in California, this person is a French citizen. How do I know all of that? So there's this kind of identity context that didn't exist before. That was the big idea of BigID and why we have like ID in the name, that identity matters, right? When you talk about privacy. And so when we got our start, we kind of felt that nobody was taking that approach. We were going to take that approach, and that approach was critical to be able to solve certain reporting problems like data access requests, data deletion requests, PIAs, et cetera. So that's how we got our start. And then, you know, we kind of evolved from there.
Mm-hmm. So in our today's conversation, we will concentrate more on risks around cloud data. So Dimitri, could you please explain some business cases around your solution that might help us, our audience, risk and compliance managers, understand what it is for them?
Yeah, sure. So we started off in privacy, but there's kind of two dimensions to risk. There's regulatory risk, of which GDPR could be one example, GLBA could be another example, HIPAA could be another example, PCI could be an example. And then there's kind of exfiltration, theft risk, right? Typically associated with kind of security risk. And those are both represents risk, right? So from a regulatory standpoint, do I have and am I misusing kind of regulated data? It could be health data, it could be, again, privacy data, it could be financial data. On the risk side, do I have sensitive data or critical data, maybe client identifiable information that's kind of floating around, represents a potential kind of breach. So as we evolved from that initial kind of privacy use case of being able to locate in this kind of identity centered way, we kind of started investing more and more on how do we become a better platform for helping any organization understand their regulated risk and their security risk when it comes to the data, right? So how do I make it easier to identify my GDPR data, my CCPA data, my GLBA data? And then secondly, how do I make it easier for them to be able to kind of identify data by sensitivity? Hey, I have top secret data, I have a patent, I have a recipe that's gonna kind of, that my whole business is built on, et cetera. So we kind of developed that. And then I think what we realized is we want to also help organizations kind of reduce the risk, right? So how do we remediate the risk? We kind of built modules on top of that to know the risk and then kind of take advantage of it. But what we've seen kind of coming out of COVID, and maybe COVID was an accelerant to this, is that a lot of that risk that people at least perceive intellectually is in the cloud, right? I think historically for the data center, they may have different kinds of solutions for different kinds of problems. Maybe their file system has one solution, they have a GRC solution for other things. They have kind of a hodgepodge of technologies, and that kind of worked on premise. But now with this kind of acceleration to the cloud, you know, maybe furthered by COVID, maybe not, there's this kind of insecurity when it comes to data in the cloud, right? It's sitting, especially in the public cloud, it's no longer theirs. It's sitting in AWS, it's sitting in Azure, it's sitting in Office 365, it's sitting in GCP, it's sitting in Salesforce, it's sitting in Workday and ServiceNow, in Jira, Atlassian, GitLab, GitHub, et cetera. And there's this kind of insecurity about not knowing what's there, not knowing if it's safe, not knowing if it's regulated and requires kind of special attention, whether it's the ones I talked about or whether it's like special client identifiable data for Switzerland. And so what we've seen is a greater kind of energy around thinking around what is my cloud data risk, right? What risk does my cloud represent? Because remember, now not only do I have all the risk around kind of the data being stolen, well, I still have that, but I have all these other kind of new vagaries, right? I could have data in an S3 bucket. Well, an S3 bucket could be open, it could be over privileged. I could have cross-border data flows. That represents risk, right? A lot of countries disallow data to be brought over without special special kind of special rules. It could be data around, do I have critical data that's unencrypted? And so what we've seen as a company at BigID is this problem of data protection and privacy. While we support the on-prem and cloud, the urgency with the cloud is much higher because there's less notion of where is that data located. I don't really have my full arms around it because it's not in my data center, it's in somebody else's data center. And it may be moving around, right? And people now are free to create more data, to post more data. It just kind of has this, you can't kind of constrain it. And so the risk around data represents, I think in people's psychology, IT leaders, security leaders, board members, a big deal. And so knowing that data and being able to take action on it, whether it's blocking it from, going to a third-party supplier, or whether it means at least alerting you to the fact that it's residing in an open file system, is a bigger and bigger deal.
It looks like you described the system that work perhaps for large companies that can afford kind of group of data analytics to observe this and take actions, but how, does it work for smaller companies?
It does. In fact, we've actually created a BigID product and a SmallID product. And the SmallID product is designed, yeah, I know, it's designed for kind of smaller companies. So it's designed as a smaller footprint. You pay as you go. There's less commitment. BigID has a lot more kind of modules. But yes, we have a version of BigID, of kind of a BigID for bigger companies, self-described, and SmallID for companies that just want to get started faster, may not have all the infrastructure. But remember, today, most companies are putting the majority of their energy on the public cloud. Similarly, even smaller companies, they're 100% in the public cloud, right? Nobody's buying a server for their data center. Nobody has a data center. No office has a wiring closet anymore. Very few do. So the public cloud has won the war, right? That's where most people are putting their files, their databases, their data lakes, their developer kind of code repositories. And so now the challenge is, okay, I'm worried about the security of that. And there's tools to worry about the infrastructure security. But what BigID and SmallID offer are tools to help you deal with the data security, right? How do I understand my data risk? And then how do I take action to reduce that data risk?
So I would like to take you to ask you a personal point of view. Yeah. What is the commonly held belief in the data privacy space that you kind of strongly disagree with? Just to understand.
Yeah, so I think like any industry, there's kind of a way things were done and there's a way things we believe are going to get done. And obviously, we have a particular point of view and it's biased by kind of what we do. Historically, privacy was more about what I would characterize as privacy theater, right? It was built on an edifice that was not necessarily solid. More kind of ephemeral. And what I mean by that is, while privacy was always about data integrity and data security in a sense, it was built on a kind of a notion of the data based on surveys, questionnaires, right? You'd ask people, where is this data? And people go, I think I have this kind of data there, and there. And obviously the kind of output that you're going to get, while it may be better than nothing, it's based on memories. It's based on recollections. It's not based on records, right? It's not based on kind of data records. And so I think the biggest fallacy in privacy is that you can have effective privacy that's disconnected from the data. That relies on recollections of where the data is. And recollections are fallible, right? People forget where they put their car keys. People forget where they put their glasses. People certainly don't remember where they put, different bits and bytes of data. And so, our approach has always been that, privacy and protection are connected, and that they both begin, if you're talking about data privacy and protection, they both begin with kind of a sense of the data. And that's always been kind of our focus on kind of building that comprehensive sense of data.
So, for example, if we take a life of an average risk manager in an organization, if there is one thing that they should start to prioritize right now, from your perspective, that they are not doing right now, what would it be?
I think kind of building an inventory. So I think in as much as you care about the data, you need to basically build an asset inventory. And I think people don't have asset inventories, right? So if you want to protect physical assets, people introduced technologies like CMDB and GRC built on CMDB that looked at physical assets. Where do I have servers? That was the value. But I think what we've learned over the last decade is that the value is not in the server. The value is in what's inside of the server, the data. And inside of that data that represents risk, regulatory risk, security risk, there also represents value, right? The things that are going to drive my AI and BI and my data commercialization. And yet we don't have this kind of effective inventory of the data. And so I think, we believe effective data security and data privacy begin with an effective inventory of your data. And what's good is today there's technology like BigID that can deliver it, right? We actually build and maintain that inventory, which again is the foundational block for doing effective privacy. But also we believe it's the important part to doing effective data security as well.
Mm-hmm. So looking broadly in the industry, what are the major trends in the space, and what we're going to expect from you guys in the future?
So I think for us, we've been, so I think there's a greater focus on data. So for us, SmallID, this kind of pay-as-you-go cloud offering to do cloud data protection and privacy in a much more simplified manner is a big part of our future. We just launched it a few weeks back at the RSA Security Conference. I think from a BigID perspective, we already have a pretty solid foundation in terms of being able to look across data, understand that data from a both regulatory standpoint, security standpoint, report on it for privacy, take action on it, whether it's preventative action like remediation or other types of action like access control or encryption. And I think we're going to basically add more to it, right? I think for us, we believe that data is always at risk because of the value attached to it. It feels a little bit more untethered than it was maybe a decade ago because of the fact that so much of it is now in the cloud. And I think starting with that effective understanding, where are all your data assets, and then being able to, again, whether it's reporting on it from a privacy standpoint, or whether it's taking action on it from a security standpoint, that's kind of our future. That's what we're doing.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Maybe if you can explain us, for example, what's something you or your team have recently achieved that you are really proud of to understand what's going on in real life?
Look, we started selling about 4 years ago, and today we operate in most continents. So we're in Latin America, we're in the Middle East, we're in Asia, we're in Europe, we're in North America. We have customers around the world, a lot of household brands, which are not easy to win. There's still obviously a lot of work to do, and nothing is perfect, but I'm proud that we've been able to build a business that now employs, close to 500 people around the world. And I think that's an accomplishment. And then I think, hopefully help address some risk use cases for a lot of our clients.
Mm. I would like to ask if OneTrust is the same category player, because we have a lot of people from our trust on trust on our platform as well.
Sorry, you're asking me about OneTrust?
OneTrust, yeah. Is it the same category as you guys or not?
We overlap. So I think the big difference between OneTrust and us is, look, it's a fantastic company and they've done exceptionally well. They have built kind of a GRC tool for ESG and privacy. And we think that GRC, and we have a lot of customers that frankly use us with OneTrust. So I'll just phrase that. Our anchor capability, our kind of DNA is more about the data discovery. And the GRC type approach, while it could provide this kind of reporting that you need for regulators and even consumers, when it's cut off from the data, you're never going to be able to create that intersection between the protection of the data and the privacy of the data. And so our big difference, so we overlap, you could buy a privacy portal from OneTrust, you could buy it from us. You could buy a privacy impact assessment from OneTrust, you could buy it from us. You could buy record processing activity from them and from us. But our big difference is the fact that we could basically provide you that analysis of the data from a security and privacy standpoint. And it's fully integrated into everything else we do in terms of reporting, in terms of security. And so our strength is really on the data. And we believe that's kind of where the future is.
Fantastic. So if we summarize it, if someone who is listening to this interview would like to walk away with one or two major takeaways, what would that be?
Yeah, data privacy, data protection starts with the data. I think there's a reason the data is included in both, right? And that at the end, to be more effective in terms of risk reduction, especially in the cloud, which is where kind of a lot of people are going. You need to have this kind of situational awareness of the data. You need to have an ability to dynamically understand where is your data at risk and how is it at risk, and then again provide all the various reporting and enforcement modules over top of that to be able to take action. But first and foremost, it begins with KYD, know your data.
All right. Maybe last question I ask this all my guests. For us as a community for risk managers, I ask all of them, all my guests, how do you recommend, how do you better contribute to, how can we as a global risk community better contribute to this complex world of risk from your perspective?
Yeah, so look, I think risk is a multifaceted problem, right? You think about the problem today, and there's risk in terms of infrastructure risk, in terms of people compromising infrastructure. There's resiliency risk. Look, we're looking at it from a kind of a unique vantage. The data, I would say, is still probably the most valuable. It's the stuff that kind of drives your business, right? The infrastructure is there to support the data to some degree. And I think, again, we have these kind of, if you're familiar with kind of Plato's works, right? This kind of like shadow, this kind of theatrical work where we're looking at the kind of the shadows that represent the real world. And I think the way privacy has historically been done, and even the way kind of GRC has historically been done, is it relies on surveys and questionnaires and somehow kind of completely decouples from the data. And we need to bring those worlds together, right? I think if there's the kind of the real world and the shadow world, and the real world, you can't separate the data from the risk around the data. And so I think that's kind of my view on it.
All right. Fantastic. Thank you, Dimitri, for being on our interview today. And I wish you a great success with your company, and hope to update in a few months again with new kind of things.
Thank you, Boris.
All right. Thank you.
How was that?